Hey friend, please subscribe. 1 second for you. Big deal for me.
I was 22, sweating through a borrowed sport coat that didn't quite fit across the shoulders, sitting at the end of a long glass table in a downtown Arcata conference room. Patterson Law etched in gold behind the attorney's head. The windows were tinted, the coffee smelled burned, and my name was nowhere on the pastries. Terrence Patterson's estate. Brenna's estate. 2 dead, 1 rain-slick highway, and now a room full of people pretending we were here to grieve and not divide up the spoils. I recognized maybe 5 faces. Charlotte, of course, front row in her pearls and blazer like she was running the boardroom. 2 guys from Terrence's road crews sat near the back, cracking jokes under their breath like it was a reunion and not a funeral with paperwork. Quick note before we jump in. Drop a comment with the city or country you're listening from. It helps us see where everyone's tuning in and plan the best time for new stories. Thanks for watching Revenge by Frank. All right, let's get started. The lawyer, gray hair, pinched voice, opened with Terrence's will. Talked about holdings, vineyard stakes, and a vacation fund I didn't even know existed. Vendors nodded. Someone chuckled when a cousin got left out. Shouldn't have mouthed off about the wine, they muttered. Then came Brenna's. That hit different. He read it without flinching, just page after page of names that weren't mine. Jewelry to Charlotte. Investment accounts in a trust also managed by Charlotte. The Marin condo? Charlotte's again. People nodded like it was weather. No surprise, just confirmation. Then the attorney paused and looked straight at me. To Tobias Walker, he said. The deceased leaves 1 parcel of land located off an unnamed service road outside Oric, California, designated in the trust as the Forest Cottage. Additionally, a locked container of personal effects to be delivered to the inheritor. I felt my ears ringing. That was it? A shack in a box? Charlotte didn't blink. She leaned over and said, low and smooth, "Pack your duffel, dear. Be out by 9. Her breath smelled like mint tea and victory. "I'll need more than a day," I said. "You won't have it," she replied, sitting back like the matter had resolved itself. The prenup, her words, her paperwork, slid across a marble countertop 2 summers back, was airtight. Or so I thought. What I didn't know then was she'd added a side clause after I signed. Something about non-convertible assets and discretionary distribution. Legal speak for, I was getting 0. People started comparing their Terrence stories like they were auditioning for a eulogy. One guy claimed he'd poured whiskey for him at a fundraiser in Sonoma. Another said they talked quarterly strategy over golf. Not one of them said a single word about Brenna, like she'd been an add-on to the Patterson empire and not her own person. I kept my mouth shut, just clicked my pen and wrote it all down in my pocket notebook. Names, dates, smirks, who laughed when. I didn't have power, but I had a record. That's the difference between being screwed and being silenced. The attorney handed me a manila envelope. Inside was a claim slip for a locked metal box marked with the trust inventory tag. The clerk rolled it out from the back. I signed for it and pocketed the small brass key taped to the slip. I didn't lift the lid there. No folder, no welcome packet, just a box I hadn't opened yet. I walked out of that room hollow and light, like they'd shaken out my pockets and checked under my tongue. No wife, no home, no legacy, just a key to a piece of timber no one wanted and a room of people relieved I was leaving. Looking back, that key should have dragged on the ring. It was the first thread I pulled, and the knot finally started to give. I didn't lift the lid on the metal box until I was 3 blocks from the law office. I found a quiet corner lot near the high school and parked. Inside sat a single rust-stained cabin key, paper clipped to a note card with an address in blue ink. I set them on the dash and stared like they might explain something. 3 years earlier, I was standing under a scaffolding rig in Eureka, tool belt biting into my hips, sweat soaking through the back of my flannel. I was 19 and 6 months clean out of the county program, finishing the last stretch of a carpentry apprenticeship through the trades program. I worked under a guy named Arturo who didn't care what you'd done as long as you showed up early and didn't steal his drill bits. I kept my head down and sanded trim until my hands were raw. I liked it that way. Earned. Then came Brenna. She pulled up to the job site in a white SUV like she'd made a wrong turn on the way to a yoga class. But she wasn't lost. She was meeting a friend whose boyfriend worked upstairs. She leaned out the window, asked if I knew where the back entrance was, and laughed when I answered like I had gravel stuck in my throat. Next day, she came back with 2 iced coffees and said, "You looked like someone who needed a cold drink and a reason to talk." I didn't know how to answer that, so I took the drink and said thanks. She smiled, and that was it. I was hooked. We moved fast. I didn't have much to offer, no savings, no family name, but I could fix anything, and I think she liked that. Terrence Patterson liked it too at first, said I had use. I carried lumber at his sites, filled propane tanks at his lake place, fixed a leaky sink in the guest house, all without being asked twice. He called it learning the Patterson way. I just nodded and kept my head down. Charlotte didn't nod. She looked through me like I was a temp agency misfire. "He's presentable if he's quiet," I overheard her saying on speaker once when she didn't know I'd walked into the kitchen. So I stayed quiet. Our first apartment was above a bakery in Old Town. Real floors, real rent, real nights. We ate frozen pizza in our underwear and talked about maybe getting a dog. Then Charlotte offered to upgrade us into a Patterson-owned place closer to the water. I was too proud to say no, too broke to mean it. The house had 3 dishwashers. One was for wine glasses, apparently. The pool had an automatic cleaner and no towels. The pantry had labels on every shelf: flour, rice, pasta, snacks, like it was a triage center. I didn't pick a single thing in that house. I just lived in it. "Why are you trying to work?" Brenna said one afternoon when I brought up going back to a framing crew in Arcata. "Dad's got us covered. Help me with this cabinet, will you?" What she handed me wasn't a cabinet. It was a 3-page to-do list that included organizing the garage, hemming the curtains in the guest room, and power washing the back walk. She said it with a smile. I wrote it all down in my notebook anyway. That notebook stayed with me. My one habit I kept. The tools I used at Arturo's shop stayed too. Boxed and tucked into a corner of the garage like a backup plan I was too stubborn to throw out. The gaslighting started soft. She bought me a watch I didn't ask for, handed it to me in front of her cousins at a brunch, kissed my cheek. That night she said, "Don't wear that shirt again. You look tired in navy." I told her I liked it. She replied, "Lucky you don't need to impress anyone, right?" Charlotte took over the money. That happened quietly. One card got declined, then replaced with another. She tracked what I used the truck for. Texted me after I filled it up. "Wrong card for gas, sweetheart. Try again." They threw parties. I carried trays. Guests asked if I was the guy who fixed the decking at the vineyard, and Brenna would laugh and say, "Among other things." I didn't laugh. I just took empty plates and tried not to break anything. We got married in a country club gazebo with string lights and pastel everything. Brenna was 19. I was 20. The vows sounded like they'd been picked from Pinterest and polished by Charlotte herself. I read them off a folded card and kissed her hand like I'd rehearsed it 100 times. Maybe I had. The prenup was signed at a marble bar in the wine room. "Signed so we can order dessert," Brenna joked. I didn't read the fine print, just signed it. My fault. A year and a half later, Brenna turned 21. We had champagne on the patio. A week after that, they were dead. Brenna and Terrence, northbound on US 101. Rain, slick roads, and a semi that couldn't stop in time. The condolence cards came in thick envelopes. Most of them said Terrence and daughter in the greeting line. One even called me the fiancé, like they couldn't believe we'd actually been married. Someone asked me what the burial plans were for Terrence. Like I'd know. I slept in the guest room that first week, on a mattress with a busted spring and no sheets. Nobody noticed. Nobody asked. By the time probate rolled around, I wasn't angry anymore. I was empty, numb in a way I didn't recognize. But I still had the notebook. Still wrote everything down. Because if I couldn't fight, I could remember. And sometimes, that's the same thing. The road to Auric got worse the farther I went. Gravel gave way to potholes, then to what looked like runoff cuts from a storm nobody cleaned up after. My truck bottomed out once on a buried log. The forest on either side was tight, redwoods stretching up like guards, not friends. I passed a collapsed shed, a rusted-out trailer, and what looked like the bones of a gate. The address on the note card led me past a stump field, old logging scar, bare patches where machines had torn the earth decades ago. The trees hadn't bothered coming back. Then I saw it. The place sat at the end of a short rise, sagging hard to the left. One story, foxed shingles peeling like old scabs, porch warped and dipped like it remembered better days. It looked like something out of a forgotten permit file. No mailbox, no power lines, just weeds, rot, and silence. I stepped out of the truck and scanned the ground. Fox tracks, definitely. Maybe raccoon too. I'd hunted once, back when I was 15 and angry and needed to hit something that wouldn't hit back. Those signs never left your brain. The front door stuck. I had to shoulder it open. Inside, the air hit me first. Stale beer, rotting wood, bleach, and something underneath that I didn't want to name. I've cleaned plenty of places, moldy basements, greasy trailers, a one-room cabin near burnt ranch with squirrel bones in the stovepipe. But this wasn't just dirty. This was wrong. The furniture was cheap and broken. A folding table with one leg duct taped, a camp chair half collapsed, mattress on the floor with no sheets, empty bleach jug near the door. No garbage, no wrappers, no beer cans. Too clean in a way that said someone was scrubbing, not living. I fixed the door latch out of habit. Loose strike plate, screws stripped, probably kicked once too hard. I knelt to check the floor near the mattress and noticed the rug. Looked like something that had already lived in 3 other places. I pulled it back. That's when I saw the hatch. A square cut into the floorboards, almost flush but not quite. Someone had painted over it, then thrown that rug down like it'd hide anything. Bad cover job. Rookie mistake. I grabbed a crowbar from the truck and popped it open. The crawl space was maybe 3 feet deep. Dirt floor. Just enough room to crouch if you didn't mind banging your head. In the far corner, a cot made from plywood slats and 2 milk crates. On top, a filthy quilt that looked damp even in dry air. Next to it, a 5-gallon bucket with a plastic bag inside, already half tied off. The walls down there weren't just cobwebs. They were marked. Scratches. Little nicks, like someone had scraped with fingernails or tools, trying to count days or keep sane. My throat went cold. I climbed down, slow, and lifted the quilt. Underneath was a strip of light denim, something torn from jeans or maybe a pillowcase. The letters weren't inked. They were pressed, written so hard it indented the fabric. Help. Call HD. 707-2, 4 stars. The rest was smudged. I took a photo on my old flip phone, then dropped the cloth in a freezer bag from my toolkit. I stood there a long minute, crouched by that cot, listening. No footsteps. Just whine through the porch and the distant knock of a woodpecker. Next to the cot was a plastic cuff with Velcro straps, standard restraint. Black, frayed. On the inside, a tiny logo, a plain gray shield. Wildline Protective. I'd seen it before on site trucks trailing Terrence's crews, mostly on remote projects, wildland clearances, trail prep, back of the map stuff. I turned to the nearest joist and noticed something wedged in the gap, pried it out with my flathead. It was a cheap candy tin, like the kind from Christmas gift baskets. The seal had electrical tape around it, plus a layer of aluminum foil underneath. I peeled it open and felt my hands start to shake. Inside was an SD card. I didn't touch anything else, just climbed back up, grabbed my pocket camera from the glove box, an old Panasonic with a mini screen and a working reader, slid in the card. 1 video, grainy, dim. First few seconds, Headlights in motion, bouncing like off dirt roads. Gravel noise. Breathing. Tight. Panicked. A voice, low but clear. 40 minutes to Fortuna. I stopped it there. Couldn't take more yet. Sat on the porch step with the card wrapped in foil and the cloth sealed in a bag. I pulled out my notebook and started writing. Date, time, weather, everything I'd seen and touched. Even the smell. Old smoke, bleach, something metallic under it all. I added a drawing of the logo. Not a great one, but good enough to recognize if I saw it again. The key Brenna left me, once just a pathetic parting shot, felt heavier now. This wasn't some backwoods poker chip. This was a dump site, a dead end, a secret someone had no plans to explain. I closed the hatch, reset the rug, and locked the front door behind me. On the way out, I spotted another detail. One chair leg near the table was taped with zip ties. Same make as the ones down below. Same knot pattern, same everything. Someone had moved fast here, then moved on. I drove slow back toward town, checking my mirrors more than the speed limit. The redwoods swallowed the road behind me like they were in on it. Every curve felt like a dare. I didn't play music, didn't call anyone. Just drove with both hands on the wheel and that card in my pocket like it could burn through. For the first time since Brenna died, I felt something that wasn't confusion or shame. I felt focused, anger, clean and sharp. Not at her. At whoever thought a woman could be left like that and forgotten. I parked behind the Safeway in McKinleyville, engine idling low, and pulled the burner phone from the glove box. I'd kept that thing from shop jobs where people didn't want their business tied to a name. The number on the cloth sat in my notebook under the date, circled twice. North Coast area code. Local. Close. Too close. I dialed. It rang 3 times before a woman answered. Her voice cracked on the word hello, like she'd been crying or hadn't slept in a week. I told her I was trying to reach someone named HD. She didn't respond, just breathed sharp like she'd been punched. Then a man's voice came on, steady but worn to the bone. "This is Harry Davis." I didn't waste time. "I found a note," I said, keeping my tone flat. "In a cabin I inherited. I'm not naming locations yet. I just need to know if the initials match someone missing." He didn't speak for a full second. When he did, it was like someone had crushed gravel into his throat. "My daughter Katie's been missing 7 months. Last seen after a volunteer shift at an animal shelter in Trinidad." I needed proof. "Tell me something only a parent would know," I said. He didn't argue, didn't demand. He just answered. "Scar on her left ankle," he said. "Trail run wipeout when she was 16. She kept running on it for a mile before admitting she was hurt. Stubborn to the bone." Good enough. I described the cot, the cuffs, the logo on the restraint. I didn't sugarcoat anything. He didn't make a sound until I mentioned Wildline Protective. "Wildline did contract work near protected parcels," he muttered. "My ex-partner's buddy ran their special projects. Quiet stuff, off the books." I heard something slam in the background. Maybe a door, maybe his hand against a wall. "I can pay you," he said. "If you have information, I'll compensate you fairly." "No," I said. "Bring a lawyer. Bring the sheriff. Bring whoever you trust. I'm done doing favors for rich men." There was a breath, then a low, "All right." We agreed to meet at the Humboldt County Sheriff's substation near McKinleyville. I drove there slow, keeping my mirrors tight, heart still thudding from the SD card video I'd barely watched. I pulled in first and parked against the curb. 10 minutes later, an old Land Cruiser rolled up, mud-caked on the wheel wells. Real mud. Forest mud, not the look outdoorsy kind. A man stepped out, tall, square shoulders, hair gone gray at the temples. He carried a folder thick with flyers. When he handed it to me, my chest tightened. Katie's face, 22, dark hair, eyes fierce like she had a plan and dared the world to argue. "She was supposed to run with me that morning," he said. Didn't show, never missed a run in her life. I didn't try to comfort him. Would have been an insult. A deputy came out when Harry waved him over. Younger guy, clean uniform, that careful posture that said he wasn't sure what he was walking into. I handed him the freezer bag with the cloth and the SD card, then my notebook. He flipped through the pages and nodded slow, like he appreciated someone who didn't ramble. "Let's go inside," the deputy said. We gave statements in a cramped interview room that smelled like old coffee and disinfectant. I walked them through every detail, where the hatch was, how the tin was taped, what the writing looked like. Harry paced behind me, one hand on his hip, the other gripping the back of a chair like he needed the anchor. When I finished, the deputy stepped out to call a judge for a warrant. Harry stepped out to call his general counsel. I heard him say, "File whatever you need. Move it now." No shouting. Just that steady tone of a man who'd already burned through panic and come out steel on the other side. He came back in a few minutes later and sat across from me. He looked at me the way a man looks at a map right before choosing the hardest trail. "I can't fix everything," he said, "but I don't let people who help me hang." His voice didn't shake. It sounded like a vow carved into something solid. I didn't answer. Not yet. The deputy returned and said the judge was signing off and that a team was already gearing up to move on the location. Things were moving fast, faster than I expected. Maybe because my notes were clean and tight. Maybe because they'd been waiting 7 months for a break. When they wrapped the intake, I shook Harry's hand, firm and direct. His grip stayed a second longer than necessary, like he was trying not to hold on. I drove back to the shack before dusk. Couldn't help myself. I wanted to see if I'd missed anything. The light under the redwoods had that late-day gold, the kind that made shadows look thicker. Inside the kitchen drawer, under a pile of old takeout menus and screws, I found a receipt stub. Bleach, rope, energy drinks, cash. Timestamp 14 days before. Not old, not forgotten. Someone had been here recently, maybe while Brenna was still alive, maybe after. I snapped a photo, bagged it, and texted it to the deputy with the note. "Found this in the kitchen drawer. Matches earlier timeline." He responded within a minute. "Received. Stay away from the site tonight." I didn't argue. Still, I didn't trust the silence around the place. I locked the truck, slid the folding knife open, and laid it across my thigh as I leaned back against the seat. The dark crept in slow. Every creak of the trees sounded like a boot on gravel. I didn't sleep. Not fully. I just waited, eyes half open, hand on the knife, ready in case someone decided to come clean up what I'd already found. I stayed that way until the first gray edge of dawn pushed through the windshield. By mid-April, the sheriff's tech team had cut the audio from the SD card into chunks. They matched train horns, grocery store PA chimes, even the tone of a crosswalk countdown to specific locations between Eureka and Fortuna. It was the kind of forensic work that felt slow on the outside, but they moved fast. While I was sitting in my truck reading old receipts, they were building the case. A week later, they hit a storage unit in Fortuna. The place looked dead from the outside, one of those rows of rust-colored metal doors tucked behind a chain-link fence off the freeway. Inside, plastic bins zip-tied shut, a mattress on pallets, tarps reeking of mildew, a roll of duct tape half-used. There was a whiteboard map with red grease pencil lines marking rural pull-offs and service roads. One arrow pointed straight to Auric, another to Wiat. Another, scratched out, had been labeled backup. The whole thing stank of panic and poor planning. A janitor from one of Terrence's quarry sites rolled over on a warrant. They brought him in thinking he was small time. Turned out he was central. He folded almost immediately. Said he'd been paid cash to house-sit the shack, then later the storage unit. Claimed Terrence told him he'd lost access to the cabin in a poker game the previous fall. No title transfer, no record. Total cover story. Meant to explain why the shack changed hands with a key and not a deed. "They moved the girl twice," he said. "Once to the shack, once out. then dropped the storage unit after the floods washed part of the road. He never said Katie's name, just the girl. I hated him for that. 3 days later, they found her. She was in a modular unit parked behind a gas station east of Wayot, half hidden behind a stack of broken pallets and abandoned appliances. The place looked like somewhere raccoons would avoid. Inside, the air was thick and hot. A cot, a blanket, a bucket. That was it. She was alive, dehydrated, bruised, sunken-eyed, but alive. They carried her out wrapped in 2 emergency blankets. The medic told Harry to give her space, but she reached for him like she'd been waiting for that one moment to stay upright. He dropped to his knees and held her like she might disappear again if he let go. I didn't follow them to the ambulance. Wasn't my place. But I drove to the hospital anyway. Didn't go inside the room. I sat in the hallway, against the far wall, near a vending machine that only took singles. I watched Harry bring in a trauma specialist. Private guy, older, no small talk. Harry didn't shout orders, didn't pace or micromanage. He just stood nearby, arms crossed, face steady, eyes locked on the doctor's every move like it was a surgery he was paying for with his soul. Around midnight, a nurse came out rubbing her temples. She looked around, spotted me and said, "You're the guy who found her, right?" I nodded once. "We need O-negative blood. Got a small reserve, not enough." I stood and rolled up my sleeve before she finished the sentence. "You sure?" she asked. "I'm here, aren't I said. The tech who took my blood smiled faintly and said, "You got a roadmap in these arms. Easiest stick I've done all week." Back in the hallway, I pulled out my notebook and started writing again. Notes kept me level. I logged every shift change, doctor's name, medication time. I didn't know what I'd do with the info, but writing it down made things make sense. When everything else fell apart, facts held the line. The fallout came quick. Sheriff's detectives pulled Wildline's permits. Turned out they'd used subcontractor crews to skirt regulation. The DA gave a press statement that hinted at private security abuse of access. I watched it from my phone in the hospital lobby. Charlotte, I later found out, wasn't thrilled. She called 2 Patterson board members to ask why my name was mentioned in the story. Like I'd embarrassed the family by not dying quietly. Didn't stop there. The janitor gave them a name. Terrence's consultant. I knew that guy. He'd sat next to me at our last 4th of July party, chewing a cigar like he was owed applause. Bragged about clearing right-of-ways and solving problems that didn't need paperwork. Now he was the problem. He lawyered up. That slowed things down for about a week. Then someone showed him the SD card, and the grease pencil map, and the rope receipt with our zip code stamped at the bottom. He cracked. Everything came spilling out. The timeline, the movements, who paid whom, when they panicked and pulled her from the shack, what they planned to do if she talked. Katie woke up for a stretch during the 2nd week. I heard it from the nurse station. She didn't say much, just asked for water. Held Harry's hand like she was still bracing for the fall. He cried, didn't make a sound, just stood there, eyes red, mouth clamped shut. I stood by the vending machine, staring at the options like one of them might unlock the right words. Nothing came, so I left. Drove back to the shack before sunrise, parked on the same slope I always used, sat on the porch steps, and listened to the ravens stir in the trees. The morning was colder than usual, air sharp with dew. I looked at the ground where I'd found the hatch. I could still see the scrape marks from the rug. The nails I'd reset were already rusting again. I wasn't a hero. I just kept my eyes on what was in front of me when it would have been easier to blink. The clinic had that smell. Sanitizer over old vinyl. Cold air blowing too hard through ductwork that hadn't been cleaned right. I was heading out, half awake from another long night, when a young doc in a badge-stiff white coat tapped my arm and asked if we could speak privately. He shut the door behind us and didn't sit. "Your blood type flagged a cross-match," he said, looking at his tablet like it might bail him out. "It's not exact, but close enough to suggest possible kinship. We don't usually mention this, but in your case, it's close. Could mean you and the patient share a parent. Maybe more. Patient, I repeated. You mean Katie. He nodded. We can run a cheek swab to confirm or rule it out. It's your call. I swabbed my cheek right there. Didn't ask questions. Didn't want guesses. I wanted facts. When I left the clinic, I didn't go home. I drove north to the only place that had ever felt like solid ground. The county home where I was dropped off when I was 9, back when my grandmother passed and the last adult in my life stopped returning calls. It was called the North Coast Youth Center now, painted bright blue. Still had the same chain-link fence with a slant in the back, where we used to slip out and run when the staff changed shifts. Mrs. Gwen Rogers ran the place. Her hair had gone fully gray, but her eyes were exactly the same, sharp, soft, all at once. She opened the door before I knocked like she'd been watching me from the window. "Well, look what the dog dragged in," she said, then pulled me into a hug like I still had a scraped elbow in a file with too many pages. I told her everything. No drama, just the facts. The shack, the blood, the girl. She listened all the way through without interrupting. Then she walked into her office, pulled a ring of keys from under her desk, and opened a steel drawer with a pop loud enough to make the walls feel thinner. The ledger inside was old. Brown leather, warped spine, pages yellowed and too stiff. "You and a baby girl came the same day," she said, flipping pages with practiced fingers. "The note said you'd been in a car wreck, no surviving adults. Your names weren't official, just nicknames scribbled in pen. She was healthy. You were underweight and quiet, wouldn't let go of her hand." I couldn't speak. "A private adoption inquiry came in 29 hours later," she added. The paperwork was brisk. No press, no vetting. Someone had pull. "Not me," I said. "No," Gwen said, tapping the page. "But someone else did." I thanked her. She didn't let me leave without a sandwich, which tasted exactly like every brown bag lunch I ever had in that building. Too much mustard, bread smashed flat, still perfect. Harry didn't call me that week. I didn't call him either. I waited. I wanted answers, not assumptions. His legal counsel filed for a court order to unseal the file. Judge approved it within 48 hours. 2 weeks later, I read a single line that broke my ribs from the inside out. Infant twins, surrendered after vehicular collision on Highway 299. 1 male, 1 female. Grandmother deceased. Placement separated per capacity limitations. 1 sentence. Split us like firewood. The court-ordered DNA test came back fast after that. The lab tech called and confirmed it without emotion. Full sibling match, high likelihood of twin birth, shared maternal and paternal markers. Katie Davis is your biological sister. I sat on the front bumper of my truck outside the clinic and watched clouds move like they had somewhere better to be. Then I walked around back where the benches faced the trees, found Harry already there, sipping coffee and trying to look composed. "I got the call," I said. He looked up. His eyes were bloodshot, but steady. "If I'd known," he said, voice hoarse like it hurt to use, "we'd never have split you. Not for anything. You were just gone. No one told us there were 2. I didn't blame him. He was sitting in the same wreck as me, just from a different seat. "I was there the whole time," I said. 5 exits down, waiting for someone to connect the dots. Gwen cried when I told her. I don't say that to shame her. Gwen's got a spine like a redwood and a mouth sharp enough to cut through marble. But she cried anyway. Wiped her eyes on her sleeve, then stood and said, "Stay mad only as long as it teaches you where to push." That line stuck. Harry didn't offer me a check, and I respected that completely. What he did offer was a hammer, a full crew of his people, and a weekend of labor up at the shack. "Money first makes strings," he said. "Sweat builds respect." He was right. We gutted that place like it had sinned, hauled out rot, replaced joists, ran new plumbing and laid a fresh subfloor. I carved a fox into the porch beam, because they were always around that land, always watching. Took 3 hours and a bloody thumb, but it came out clean. We cooked over a camp stove. Katie came by one afternoon and didn't say anything. just touched the carving and walked inside without flinching. Later that month, I found out Charlotte had forged the prenup witness line. Hadn't even tried to cover it right. A paralegal flagged it while sorting filings for unrelated probate documents. That forged signature meant the prenup wasn't worth the paper it was printed on. Didn't get me a payout. Didn't buy back the years. But it made a record. I'd been played. Now it was public. Also later, Wildline lost contracts in 3 counties. A memo leaked that mentioned security irregularities and failure to disclose subcontractors. Their founder sold his lake house up near Tahoe, downsized. The janitor, Diego, pled out. Lesser charges, supervised probation, then showed up 3 months later working cleanup for Parks and Rec out by Clam Beach. He waved when I passed him on the trail. "Trying to redirect," he said. "Try harder," I replied. But I didn't stop him. The last of the porch repairs were done when I got the call about the ranger aid slot. Seasonal work, nothing glamorous, trail maintenance, emptying trash cans, logging wildlife sightings when they didn't turn out to be plastic bags. It didn't pay much, but it was real. No suits, no strings, no one asking me to carry trays or explain my last name. That alone made it worth showing up. My first shift started with fog heavy over the trees and a busted shovel handle. The trailhead kiosk was cracked from a winter branch fall. I fixed it without waiting for a form to be filed. By mid-morning, I had 2 splinters, a clean log entry about a barred owl near Tall Trees Grove, and my first radio check-in that didn't sound like I'd swallowed gravel. That's how Kelly Rogers noticed me. She worked admin out of the field office, permits, emergency response logs, budget requests. Radios crackled all day, and she answered everyone without sounding annoyed. Gwen had mentioned her niece worked for the park, but she hadn't mentioned that Kelly ran the place better than most of the brass. She wasn't impressed by news stories or names. She didn't care about rescue headlines or interviews I'd been roped into. What got her attention was that I labeled tools the right way and didn't mess up the species code on owl reports. "You spelled Strix varia right on the first try," she said, tapping the clipboard like it owed her something. "That's rare." I shrugged. I just wrote down what I saw. Then I checked twice. We talked dogs before sunrise one morning. I was logging fuel levels for the gator cart, and she came by with a thermos and 2 biscuits wrapped in wax paper. She asked if I had pets. "Not yet," I said. "Always wanted 2 or 3, but I've never had a place that was mine." She nodded, then said, "Dogs deserve a place that's theirs too." That stuck with me. Harry showed up the next day with lumber and a box of cabinet hardware he'd over-ordered for a kitchen remodel. Gwen followed an hour later with a bag of groceries and that firm look that made people check their posture. She watched Harry lift boards and said, "You missed a spot," which made him grin like a teenager. We found the metal tag under the crawl space a few days after Kelly stopped by to drop off wildfire signage. She crouched near the porch, moved a board, and I saw the glint. Flat, rectangle, scratched edges. An inventory marker. Stamped number matched the Patterson storage yard where the janitor had claimed he'd never been. That tag, combined with the SD card, buried the consultant in court. Paper keeps a memory when mouths won't. Charlotte sent a letter not long after. Her lawyer mailed it on embossed letterhead, full of legalese that boiled down to one sentence. I had committed extortion by narrative, by telling Harry anything about the shack. I brought it into the ranger office, still sealed, and handed it to my supervisor. He read the first paragraph, laughed out loud, and pinned it to a corkboard labeled comedy. Kelly walked past, read over his shoulder, and said, "You want to keep your address less public for a while?" "Not a bad idea," I replied. She helped me set up a P.O. box and walked me through a quieter routine, when to skip certain emails, how to file mail redirections without raising red flags. Her kind of admin had teeth under it. Meanwhile, my notebook filled up fast. Field logs turned into written statements. Statements turned into affidavits. I didn't tell stories. I gave facts. Clean ones. The kind that can stand up in court without flinching. Kelly and I started packing trail lunches for each other. At first it was convenience. She was already making 2 sandwiches, and I already had 2 bottles of water. Then it turned into routine. Then it felt like time we carved out on purpose, even if we didn't say that out loud. I signed up for the Ranger exam, studied policy bullet points and memorized map sections. Missed 1 question on fuel spill response and didn't pass. Kelly didn't say, "That's okay." She just slid a binder across the desk with 3 paper clips and said, "You'll hit it next time." She wasn't the cheering type. She was the get back in and fix it type. Harry and Gwen, meanwhile, had stopped pretending they were just comparing calendars. They'd show up together to volunteer at trail cleanups, bicker softly about glove sizes, then leave in the same car. He smiled with his eyes again. I hadn't seen that in him during the first weeks. He'd been all bark and bone. Now he moved like a man who remembered what peace felt like. One night, after another long shift clearing invasive thistle near the fire road, I sat on my porch beam and looked out at the redwoods like they were people I'd finally learned to trust. The fox carving I'd made after the rebuild had weathered a bit, edges softening, grain deepening, but it still looked forward, like it knew more than it let on. I thought about all the times I'd been told to shut up, to back down, to be lucky. I had what I had. And here I was. No leash, no script, no one picking out my shirts or tracking my fuel receipts. Just me, the trees, and the kind of quiet that didn't ask questions. It didn't feel like getting back what I'd lost. It felt like starting on ground that finally held. It didn't take long for Charlotte to retaliate. She threw a brunch at the country club, white tablecloths, eggs nobody touched, and a fresh stack of printed programs. People called it a gathering for reflection. What it really was? A staged performance with coffee service. She told anyone who'd listened that I'd leveraged grief for gain, claimed I twisted Terrence's legacy into a weapon. She used words like manipulative and disingenuous. The local paper picked it up and ran a soft piece that didn't name me but didn't need to. I didn't respond in print, didn't file anything. I went to the next county board meeting on environmental permits and signed up for public comment. I wasn't there to argue, just to show. I laid down clean evidence, project dates, wildline invoices, a photo of the logo cuff from the shack, the inventory tag we'd pulled from under the crawl space. No speeches, just facts. The board went quiet. One guy shifted in his seat like the metal got hotter all of a sudden. Reporters followed up the next day. They got their hands on a blurred timeline from the SD card. Audio clips matched to movement paths. A retired judge wrote an op-ed about the prenup, calling it a fraud wrapped in entitlement, and listed the forged witness line by name. That line finally saw daylight. The DA's office moved next. They dropped charges on the consultant and 2 wildline supervisors, unlicensed security operations, obstruction, unlawful confinement. Couldn't charge Terrence. He was already in the ground. But they stapled his name to every legal document tied to those contracts. Ink doesn't care if you're dead. That same week, the bank repossessed Terrence's old farm-use F-150 from a storage unit Charlotte had been paying for. She kept the license plates locked in a home safe, probably waiting for the day she could slap them on and act like it had always belonged to her. The truck went to auction for almost nothing. Needed work, but the bones were solid. Harry bought it under his company and had the title cleaned and reissued. Drove it up my dirt road one Saturday with the windows down and a grin like it was payday. He tossed me the keys and said, "Now it's a gift. Clean." I popped the hood that afternoon, rebuilt the carb, flushed the lines, cleaned out a wasp nest tucked behind the left headlight, got the old thing running like it hadn't skipped a beat. I drove that truck the way most people wear a cap on graduation day. Earned, practical, mine. Another letter came from Charlotte's lawyer after that. 3 pages of polished spit. I didn't open it, just tossed it in the recycling with the pizza boxes from the night before. A few days later, a controlled burn near Bald Hills jumped a line. Our crew got called out in the middle of the night. High winds, visibility garbage. I hauled hose in the old truck, tires kicking up ash, headlights bouncing off the blackened trunks. Kelly was on the radio, calling wind shifts and drop zones, keeping us from stepping stupid. That truck didn't flinch. Neither did she. Katie came back to the cabin soon after that. First time since the hospital. She didn't knock. Just walked in with Harry and Gwen trailing behind her. She stood in the crawlspace doorway, arms crossed, head tilted like she was reading something off the walls. After a minute, she said, "Let's replace every board this room ever had." No one argued. We started that day. Diego showed up the next morning with 4 volunteers from a shelter Katie used to work at. They brought brushes, paint, 3 casserole dishes, and 2 foster dogs that wouldn't stop wagging their tails. Nobody talked about courtrooms. Nobody talked about Charlotte. They just worked. We took out the old beams, burned the splintered ones in a controlled pit, and laid fresh boards like it was holy ground. Kelly painted the new baseboards herself, said it helped her think. Katie handled sanding. I kept the rhythm with my hammer, steady and clean. Harry didn't lift tools. He brought sandwiches and told us we were doing it right, which is what leaders do when their hands are full of regret. That summer, the gossip didn't stop, but it got quieter. People still whispered in certain stores, still gave me the long glance like I'd pulled some trick nobody could quite name, but I didn't hear it the same anymore. It was background noise, like distant highway traffic. You only notice it when you stop moving. I slept better that summer than any summer before. Clean rest, the kind that doesn't dodge dreams. Kelly and I started sketching ideas for a kennel off the laundry room. Not some big show place, just 8 by 10 feet, a fenced run, water hookup. We talked sizes, materials, spacing, used actual graph paper. We didn't say someday, we said next payday. The first dog through the door was an old red heeler with one cloudy eye and a limp that didn't slow her down when food was involved. Katie named her Maple before the paperwork was even filed. We built her a run out of salvaged fence panels and gave her a blanket Gwen sewed from old t-shirts. She claimed it was temporary, but we never took it away. The shelter took shape fast. We used the old shed behind the cabin, cleared it out, poured new concrete, ran hose lines. 8 runs, a small yard, and a sign Katie lettered by hand in white paint. Northridge Rescue, Satellite 1. Looked better than it should have. Harry handled permits through the park's legal department like he was paying off a quiet debt. Gwen ran volunteers like a general, lists, snacks, backup snacks. Kelly handled the rest. She tracked expenses, stocked chew toys, and found a food supplier that didn't charge double for bulk orders. When we asked how, she said, "I'm not telling. Just say thank you." Maple decided early on that the space under my workbench was hers. I let her have it. When I carved late into the night, her snoring drowned out everything else. The DA's office called twice while we were finishing the second dog run. They wanted clarification on the contractor statements. I pulled out my notes, stuck to the timeline, gave them exact quotes and location points. No emotion. Just what happened, how it happened, when it started, and where it ended. The defense team had nothing left to poke holes in. I took the Ranger test again the next month. Went through every bullet point Kelly had highlighted. Cross-referenced the policy binder she'd slid across the desk with her handwriting in the margins. This time, I nailed it. They pinned the badge on me the following Thursday. Kelly hugged me outside the field office and said, "Told you." No big grin, no big deal. But her hand stayed on my shoulder a beat longer than needed, like she knew what that badge meant. Diego testified 2 weeks later. Said he stayed because he owed Terrence money and was afraid of what would happen if he backed out. Said he never touched Katie, never laid a hand on her. Told the truth like it tasted bad. The court gave him supervised probation and assigned community service at our shelter. I didn't object. He showed up early on Saturdays, didn't talk much, walked the dogs and fixed latches. Katie nodded at him once. That was enough. Charlotte tried one last swing. Filed a civil complaint claiming I'd defamed the family and damaged their standing in the business community. Her attorney mailed a binder thick enough to choke a raccoon. The judge dismissed it in under 7 minutes, cited the forged witness line, the criminal filings, and said, The plaintiff appears to be attempting to relitigate her own reputation. That was the end of it. Harry proposed to Gwen on a trail spur above Tall Trees Grove. No guests, no fanfare. Just two people who'd earned their quiet. When they came down, Gwen had a cupcake box under her arm, and Harry said, "We figured you'd want to hear it from us first." Kelly and I hiked Fern Canyon a few days later, both of us sore from post holes and mulch bags. I asked if she could stand the idea of me longer than a hike. She didn't blink. Probably. I took that as a yes. Katie enrolled in the program she'd put on hold the year before. Criminal justice with a focus on victim advocacy. Told me she wasn't letting anyone else define what happened or where she went from here. She started a weekly run for the shelter dogs. Every Sunday morning, rain or shine, she'd leash up the most restless ones and jog the loop near the ridge like her legs were on fire and her past couldn't keep up. Maple became the shelter greeter. Any visitor who came up the cabin road got a full escort from the truck to the gate, tail wagging, ears up. She slept under my bench at night, curled up like she'd lived there her whole life. One Saturday, I stood by the new run gate while Gwen handed out adoption packets. Harry made terrible coffee, and Kelly barked orders at me with a clipboard like I was one of her interns. I looked around at the dogs, the people, the fence we built ourselves with hands that had been used too many ways before this. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't big. But it was ours. I wrote the date in my notebook and underlined it twice. Sometimes you mark the good as hard as you mark the bad. Harry and Gwen got married first, out at a ranch south of Trinidad. Nothing fancy, just chairs set in a half circle under the oaks, real vows spoken without microphones, and two people who'd earned the right to say exactly what they meant. Harry shook my hand like he was anchoring both of us in place and said, "Family's a verb, not a noun." Then he pulled me into a hug that had weight behind it. A month later, Kelly and I stood under the redwoods near Elk Meadow, ringed by 37 folks, 3 dogs, 2 Dutch ovens full of chili, and not a single orchid in sight. We didn't hire a planner. Gwen did the tablecloths, Harry ran the grill, and Katie handled the playlists with no slow songs allowed. Maple slept under a picnic table with a paw on my boot the whole time. Charlotte wasn't invited. No one even brought up her name. There was an empty seat near the back where someone might have saved her a spot out of habit, but nobody did. That space didn't ache the way I thought it might. It felt like setting down a weight I'd carried too long. After the cake, chocolate sheet cake with a crooked fox piped on top, Harry handed me a key ring. Metal tag shaped like a fox, weathered smooth. On it, your title, Ranger. "Figured you earned it," he said. I'm not the crying type, but that one got close. The shelter found its rhythm after that. Mornings started with runs through the tree line, Maple leading like she'd been promoted. Saturdays were for adoptions and loud kids learning how to be soft. Gwen ran the snack table. Katie handled the logs. Kelly wrote notes on every clipboard like she was running a quiet empire. I kept the fences mended and the dogs moving. Katie got invited to speak at a county meeting on nonprofit partnerships. I went to support her but ended up leaning against the back wall like I was guarding the place. She didn't talk about what happened. She talked about what systems fail when no one's watching and how to fix them without breaking people in the process. When she stepped down, people clapped like they meant it. That night, Kelly told me we were expecting. I just stared at her, mouth open, heart trying to catch up. Then I laughed like I'd gotten away with something, and no one was going to stop me. A month later, we learned it was twins. I fixed up a second-hand crib and found a third-hand one on a buy-sell board out in Crescent City. I didn't care that they didn't match. Nothing in my life has ever needed to be new to be good. Harry showed up with a jogging stroller that had more straps than our truck seats. Gwen knitted identical hats in green and yellow. "So you don't pretend to tell them apart too early," she said. The day they were born, I stood by the hospital window, counting their breaths and whispering quiet deals to whatever runs the show behind all this. I said, "I'll be fair. I'll be patient. I'll be the man I kept waiting to be asked to be." We brought them home to a cabin that smelled like cedar, coffee, and dog fur that never fully left the floor. I hung my badge on a nail beside the front door, then rested my hand on each tiny back as they breathed, slow and steady. Not loud, not rushed. That moment didn't erase anything, but it evened the scale. Some debts can't be paid back. Not to the people who picked you up when you were low. Not to the sister you didn't know. Not to the man who didn't try to fix you with a check, but handed you a hammer instead. If there's justice in any of this, it's this right here. The ones who tried to make me small now have to see me from far away. And the ones who saw me clear, they get a seat at my table, a muddy porch, and first pick of the puppies. Quick thing before you scroll. What would you do if the people who hurt you had to watch you rebuild something better than they ever imagined? Would you show them or stay quiet and just keep building? If you've got hype, tap it now to boost this story and help more folks hear it. Hit subscribe and like. Seriously, it helps way more than you think. And drop a comment, even just great story or your take. I read everyone. Love you guys.
YouTube picked this for you. Tap it. Let's see if they guessed right.